Good morning, everyone, and welcome to a very special live episode of Voices for Justice, coming to you from the 2026 South by Southwest EDU gathering right here in Austin, Texas. Today's episode is titled, Who Gets to Finish? Building a Movement for Completion Justice. Guiding us through this discussion is your host, Dr. Nia Heidel, Vice President for Institutional Transformation and Scaling at Complete College America. And she's joined by three incredible leaders who are making change happen on the ground. First is Ms. Christina Kaufman, Istanti Dakota Academic Advising Manager at Tha Na'athum Community College. Dr. Kayla C. Elliott, Director of Workforce Policy at Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies. And Dr. Felisa Ortiz Licon, Executive Vice President at Campaign for College Opportunity. Let's get started.
Well, welcome to the Voices for Justice podcast, which is part of the Higher Endeavors Network's Equity and Racial Justice Learning Track. This podcast seeks to advance equity-mindedness through conversations addressing critical topics and highlighting asset-based narratives from practitioners in the field. I'm Nia Heidel, your host, and today we're asking a question that too many would rather leave unexamined. Who gets to finish their post-secondary journey? As we ponder these questions, we will have an opportunity to hear from three game-changing leaders. Each of them is bringing to this discussion a unique vantage point and lived experiences that will create a well-rounded discussion centered on college completion as a social justice issue. The question, who gets to finish, the question is, who gets to finish? Not who gets to enroll, not who gets to walk through the doors, but who actually gets to walk across the stage, degree in hand, future unlocked. Because here's the truth, we don't talk about enough. Completing a quality higher education isn't a privilege, it's a right. And yet the data tells us a story this country has been telling for generations, that completion is rationed along lines of race, income, geography, and identity, that the systems we've built don't just fail to serve every student equally, they were designed to. We're talking about advising structures that overlook first-generation students, funding models that starve the institutions serving our most vulnerable communities, policies that punish students for the very circumstances they're trying to transcend. These aren't accidents, they're architecture. And dismantling that architecture requires more than good intentions. It requires a movement, and we will get to that later. Today we're going to dig into the landscape and what the needs are to create a different set of possibilities. We'll talk about the systems that sustain inequity in higher education, and we will challenge every professional in this space, from the registrar's office to the president's cabinet, from advisors to adjunct faculty, from the policymaker to the community agency, to see themselves as part of the solution. Because equitable completion isn't one department or one organization's job. It's everybody's work. We will also discuss the role of students in this work and how we make sure they have opportunities for agency. So whether you're a practitioner, a policymaker, a researcher, or someone who simply believes that a student's zip code or skin color should never determine where they earn a credential, this conversation is for you. So let's build something and get into it. All right, so first of all, let me thank our esteemed panelists for joining us today and your willingness to participate in this podcast, in this conversation. Since our time is short, I'm going to ask each of you to briefly introduce yourself, your role in your organization, and tell us a little bit about your work and your journey to this work, and then how your work relates to our question related to who gets to finish. So let's start with Christina.
Thank you so much, Nia. So hello, everyone. My name is Christina Kaufman. I am the Academic Advising Manager at Tha Na'athum Community College in Sells, Arizona. The main campus of the college is about 60 miles southwest of Tucson. So to answer the question posed, my journey to this work started when I was in community college. I myself was a non-traditional student. I didn't come back to school until I was 22 years old, and I had gotten all of my party out of my system. I was ready to go back to school, and I was ready to take that next step. I started at a TCU. There are 37 tribal colleges and universities across the country. I'm an alumni from Nebraska Indian Community College. After finishing there and getting my associate's degree in early childhood education, I transitioned to Wayne State College in Wayne, Nebraska, which is a predominantly white institution, as you can guess, in Nebraska. I was pursuing education there, but rerouted to straight English writing and literature. But I was always rooted in my experience at the tribal college and the opportunities that I was provided while I was there, and knew that at the end of my educational journey, I wanted to come back to a TCU and provide that same guidance and help that I got when I was at Nebraska Indian Community College. Second question, my job is literally to help students understand what is required of them academically to get that credential, to get that degree, to get that certificate. But as a general statement, higher ed doesn't always realize that many students are one flat tire away from having to step away from education. And so that was something that I really wanted to stay grounded in, because as a non-traditional student, I had to work, I had to help take care of my elderly grandmother, I had a lot of things on my plate, and so do my students. And so while I help them understand the academic requirements, the credit requirements, I also try to help them understand the personal requirements. What's already on your plate? What do you already need to be responsible for? And so approaching it in an authentic and genuine way and having those conversations with them about my own experience, I feel it really helps them ground themselves and understand that they don't have to take the approach that traditional education says they're supposed to. You don't have to take a full-time schedule. You don't have to go straight to university. And ultimately, I want them to remember who they are and why they are here. So whether that means, starting slow, asking for help, they're their ancestors' biggest dreams. And it's really beautiful to see them succeed.
Thank you so much. Kayla?
Sure. It's still morning. Good morning. I am Dr. Kayla C. Elliott. I am currently the Director of Workforce Policy at the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies in D.C., which is America's Black think tank. We've been around for 55 years. I've been there for 3 years, leading work on workers' rights, workforce development opportunities, and access to good jobs. And before that, led a higher ed policy team looking at access, affordability, and accountability for students of color and students from low-income backgrounds. I like to say that I am a writer, womanist, wanderer, and wonderer. In addition to my research and advocacy as a higher ed and workforce policy expert, I'm a bookworm, a speculative fiction writer, a girl's girl, a third-generation HBCU alum, and all of these identities led me to exactly where I am. Being a higher ed scholar, it's funny because I can look back on my family's educational journey and see so many of the concepts that we study, right? So my grandmother is from small town in Alabama, and she completed 4 degrees from her HBCU over the course of 50 years. She went back when I was in middle school and got a second master's. And so she was a woman who instilled the importance of education into my family, the importance of HBCUs. She not only did that, but she sent her son and daughter to community colleges and then on to HBCUs and made sure that my dad was in ROTC. that's college affordability, right? Like that's understanding paths to affordability for your family, right? My mom started her bachelor's degree when I was in middle school, and she taught for a long time as a teacher in a private school with her associate's degree. And when we transitioned from private school into public school, she made sure that I was on a path to AP classes. I was in feeder programs, I was in this, I was in that. That's understanding academic capital, right? And what it means. Once I got to high school, we were incredibly clear, my family was incredibly aware of every single requirement for Florida's merit-based public scholarship. We knew how many community service hours I needed, we knew the test scores I needed, we understood how to navigate the college access system, right? And then truthfully, I'm also here because I have that special brand of neurodivergence that did come with pattern recognition, but did not come with rejection sensitivity, so I have no problem asking, right? Like asking for things. I have had 9 internships. I look back over my resume, I think I've had 9 internships and a couple jobs, but all of those were as a result of programs and opportunities that I was given. Inroads led me to a Fortune 100 job that introduced me to a master's program that I was able to go to fully funded, right? Sponsors for Educational Opportunity placed me in an internship in New York City that led to my first full-time job offer. The Southern Educational Leadership Initiative led to an internship that led to my first job offer in DC. I'm here and I got to finish because I was supposed to. Not because I was special, not because of any particular thing, but because I had a family, I had opportunities, we had the capital, we had the access, we had the understanding of how to navigate this system. And so my completion isn't I got to finish, and my completion isn't a testament to that the system is working. It's a testament to the fact that if you're set up to do so, you will.
Thank you. Felicia?
Buenos dias, good morning. Feliz Ortiz Ligon. I'm the Executive Vice President at the Campaign for College Opportunity. We're a statewide organization in California dedicated to research, policy, and advocacy on behalf of historically minoritized students. Our work is really to ensure that our students have access to and to get to and through college so that they could strengthen our workforce, our economy, and democracy. And so I love listening to your stories because I think I'm somewhere in the middle. I always say that my educational journey was at the intersection of oppression and privilege. I'm first-generation American, first-generation college goer. I come from a low-income family background. I was a multilingual learner. So there's a lot of my demographic profile that the system was not set up for, right? I was not in mind when our higher education system was designed. And yet I was able to defy the statistical analysis. I would say that I would stop out at some point. I received my high school degree against the odds. I received a bachelor's degree against the odds. I received a master's and a doctorate degree against the odds. And I've often considered my journey and what led me, a Latina, first generation from immigrant parents who had very little formal education in their native country, to be able to overcome. And I think it has to do with a lot of the networks of support, the pockets of support that people have created for students like me, but not institutionalized supports, right? I attended 3 of the most allotted UCs in California, and I came to the conclusion that I was admitted but never accepted, right? I had to really find my voice and my space. I was admitted, and then I had to navigate, and I had to use all of my capitals that Ayoso calls the cultural wealth model, right? My resilient capital, my navigational capital, my familial capital, in order to get through that institution of UCLA. And I love my Bruins. Let me be very clear, I love my Bruins. But we haven't always been loved by our institutions as much as we love our institutions. And so that led me to the Campaign for College Opportunity. I have invested almost 3 decades in K-16 education, and I have intentionally worked with and on behalf of historically minoritized students. Before I joined the campaign, I was a supporter and partner of the campaign when I was working in K-12, and they launched a campaign called Save Me a Spot in College. So our organization started as a 5-year campaign. After 5 years, we realized that yes, more historically minoritized students were graduating high school, and we were getting them to the door, but not through. So that led us to reconsider our mission and also become an official organization. And we started looking at the data, and we started looking at who is stopping out. What does the data tell us about barriers? And we realized that who stops out are Latino, Black, adult learners, males, low-income students, first-generation students. And so we have dedicated over 20 years looking at policy solutions in California that are often modeled elsewhere, where we could remove those barriers. Because a lot of what we're dealing with is institutionalized practices and policies. You know, I often tell people that you may not interact with policy or shape policy, but policy shapes your everyday reality. Every single one of us has a policy story that we may not even be aware of. So policy shapes our everyday reality, and we need to make sure that when it does, those that are writing the policy, they have a lived experience that mirror our experiences, look like us, and those that are implementing the policy have an understanding of the communities that are most impacted. So we have been doing work around equitable placement, making sure that students who enter a community college, which the majority of them will be first-gen, Black, Latino, low-income, that they are not placed in remedial education, that they could go straight to transfer-level courses so that we could guarantee completion. So in our DNA as an organization, completion justice has really been at the core.
Okay, thank you. So you all can see why we have these panelists, because dynamic, right? You can clap. We're live, so you can clap. It's fine. And so we asked them to join us because we wanted to talk about the intentionality, the systems, how we're navigating, because within all of your stories, you were able to overcome in spite of, right? And so we think that that's very important when we're talking about movements, when we're talking about movement building or dismantling these barriers. We have to really look at the data, understand what's there, and then be very intentional around the experiences we provide to our students to help them navigate. So now that you all have told us how you've gotten here, let's talk a little bit about the landscape and the challenges that we have. Now, Christina, I won't always start with you, but this time I'm going to start with you again. So you're at a tribal college, which many of us in the post-secondary space have very little access or interaction with tribal colleges. Can you just talk to us a little bit about what do you want the broader community to know around your community or your sector of post-secondary institutions? And can you share with us a little bit about students' experiences and the challenges that they're facing in the structures that currently exist?
Yeah, definitely. So being here at South by Southwest EDU and talking to people and telling them, or, introducing myself and having that little conversation that we've all had 100 million times, I'm sure. And then I tell them I work at a tribal college, and they're like, oh, I didn't even think about tribal colleges. Well, a lot of people don't. There are 37 tribal colleges in the United States, soon to be 39. There's going to be one that's working toward accreditation in California, and then another that's working toward accreditation in Arizona. Arizona currently has 2 tribal colleges, the one I work for, Thon Community College, and Dene College, which was the first tribal college in the United States. So to share a little bit about what the culture is like at tribal colleges, most of them are in super rural areas. Like I said before, we're 60 miles southwest of Tucson, and fun fact, the Thon Nation is the second largest landmass as far as reservation goes. It's 3 million acres, or close to the size of the state of Connecticut. And those lands go into Mexico. And so it's a really interesting experience to have what my colleagues and friends called OIM, Autumn in Mexico, and navigating that space and also trying to be advocates for those students. But at the end of the day, it's about community and it's about family. Every indigenous community, and I'm sure you guys can say the same about your own communities, is all about family, and it's all about showing up for each other in any way that you can, whether that's making the food or making the skirts or, cleaning up at the end of a ceremony, at the end of a funeral, at the end of something, just showing up and reminding each other that we're relatives and we're all there for each other. But what ends up happening, or what I've learned in my position, is students who transfer from TOCC on to university, that's what they struggle with when they get there, is finding that community again, because they're all now in this big, huge space, like the University of Arizona, for example. It's right in the Thon-Autumn Nation's backyard. It's a land-grant institution. And so they have this idea that TOCC students are gonna go there and they're gonna transition well because we're so close. That's not the case at all. U of A has their own problems and issues, as do us all, but a lot of four-year institutions, they have these spaces, but they're not promoting these spaces in the ways that they could to ensure that the students who transition there know where they are and they know who they can talk to make those connections and feel at home again. Something that I do at TOCC in collaboration with the University of Arizona is a program called A Student's Journey, and it's specifically for students at TCUs, and it's a 5-week summer program where these students get to live on the University of Arizona's campus. They take a class, they do an internship, and it's all paid. And so they earn stipends, they don't have to worry about meals, and they get to also explore the city of Tucson and find that this is their home as well. And we also provide a ton of accommodations if students are in more non-traditional, so they have families, they have elderly aunts and uncles that they take care of. They're more than welcome to bring those folks with them as well. And we provide them off-campus housing because, you know, if you're how old was I when I got to university? 24. I don't want to live in the dorms with a bunch of 18-year-olds. Are you kidding me? I did become an RA later on when I was like 27, which was a weird experience. But it's still like, you know, we want to make this as realistic as possible, and we want to show you that Christina, I'm going to be with you through this program, and then Ben and Maida from the U of A, they're going to be with you through this program, and they're going to be at the U of A when you make your journey over there, or they can help you out with wherever your journey is going to lead you, whether that be ASU or NAU or some other four-year institution. As far as the broader community goes, I think it's important for people to remember or to try to meet students where they are, like literally and figuratively. And so come to the reservation. It's not scary, I promise. There are dogs everywhere, but you can pet them and they're usually nice and they just want your food. And you can take them home, we won't mind. But, you know, come pet the res dogs, eat some food, you know, talk to people and build that trust. Because like I said, it's all about community, and if they have a relationship and they have someone that they know they can reach out to, they're more likely to do so.
Thank you. Lisa, you're next. Here's your questions. The organization you're leading, you work on policy and successful college completion, as you shared. So what can you share with us about the policy landscape and the invisible forces that are influencing completion efforts? And then are you noticing anything specific that we should be paying attention to, that because it's invisible, that we might not know is out there?
I mean, I don't know if it's that invisible now.
Oh, yeah.
You know, you turn on the TV and it's clear that higher education is at the crosshairs of this current administration in particular, right? We are living in a time, and I've been at this for 30 years professionally, and you know, I started as a student activist. So when I was a student activist, California was a state that was passing a lot of similar policies, anti-Latino, anti-immigrant, anti-affirmative action. And you know, I used to think, well, it can't get worse. Oh, well, wait, little girl, just you wait. In a couple of years, this is going to be on steroids and national, right? And so we are witnessing a lot of hostility around this whole notion of the value of a higher education, right? Who deserves a higher education? I think that has always been the question. It's not who finishes, it's always been who deserves it. And in in the mainstream narrative, it's none of us here that look like us, really, right? And so we're seeing a lot of narrative that is questioning the value, and I often wonder, are we there yet? We don't even have a first generation of college graduates. And now we're telling students, there's other pathways, and hey, there is other pathways, right? And I think that there's quality pathways. My fear is that we're also creating a tracking system once again, one that we saw in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s. And so there's real implications for some of these rollbacks that we're seeing. When they take money away from minority-serving institutions and give it to HBCUs, they're trying to divide and conquer us. That is really like the playbook remains divide and conquer. HBCUs need to be funded, and they should be funded at higher levels. And MSIs need to be funded because they also need to provide supports for students that are first gen, those that are not completing, first generation students, immigrant students, students of color. We know that MSIs are engines of economic mobility, right? But there's this strategic play at creating these policies that are not only disproportionately impacting the students that would already not complete, but are also trying to create divisions between those of us that are seeing our communities and working collectively to uplift historically minoritized communities. A lot of what I tell people is that policy has 5 Ps. I wrote them down so I don't forget them. It's people, power, practice, price tag, and politics. So sometimes you think that you're just targeting the policy, the statute, what's in writing. That's not true. A policy really has all of these 5 Ps that are anchoring it. And there are some camps that are very sophisticated at mobilizing the people, of making sure that the politics align, of making sure that they're creating a narrative, whether true or false, about the implications of that policy in practice, right? And so we need to make sure that we also have similar movements, that we are advocating, that we understand what does this policy mean for me, for students, so that we could keep the door open and we could ensure that there is completion. And right now we are at a very hostile environment. And you think of students like undocumented students or mixed status, or students from mixed status families. Here in Texas, rolling back in-state tuition. Here in Texas, phasing out DACA status, which would give work authorization to students. What does that do? It doesn't only stop the process for a student or the educational journey of a student, but students that are already contributing to our country and have the potential to contribute more, that are part of the fabric of our nation. And so I think right now we are in a time of turmoil, and it's scary times as well, but I think it's a time for us to recommit to the mission of being bold and standing up for the students that we believe have the potential, students that are our kids, right, that started in our systems, and we want to make sure that they see their education journey through.
Thank you. Can you give us those 5 Ps one more time?
Yes, people, power, practice, price tag, and politics.
That sounds like a workshop.
Yes, stay tuned.
Okay. All right, and Kayla, as a researcher and a member of a think tank, so you're sitting in a different space, can you share with us what the historical and current data, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, tells us about where we are, what we need to do, and please include any insights around any population that you're working on specifically?
Yeah, I think your answer leads so wonderfully into mine, right? As someone who transitioned from exclusively looking at higher ed policy to now working in workforce policy at a very particular moment when funders and state governments and policymakers and the field in general is asking those 2 fields to combine. And we are experimenting in ways that we do not yet even have data to know what will work and what doesn't, right? My last few projects have been qualitative because things are moving quickly. Things are moving incredibly quickly. How many of you all out in the audience have heard of the CHIPS and Science Bill? Just a few. trillions of dollars, right? Hundreds of millions of billions of dollars are floating around over the next 7 years, right? This was a part of the Investing in America agenda under the Biden administration. And what happened was they sent out a lot of money that would typically go to Department of Labor or Department of Education in order to create new programs, new short-term credentials, new certificates, training, et cetera, for jobs to create semiconductors, right? Semiconductors are little chips that we put in everything to make it work. That's the best description I can give you because I am not a STEM girly. But that money did not flow to Department of Labor. That money did not flow to Department of Education. That money went through Commerce. That money went through Defense. That money went straight to businesses. That money went to states. That money went to local communities, cities, regions, et cetera. And it was could have been, should have been, in some ways was disruptive, right, to the way that we do policy and the way that we educate Americans and prepare them for jobs. And the powerful thing there were the equity commitments, right? In order to be eligible to receive that funding, you had to have equity plans. You had to do things that were reflective of the community that you were serving. And all of that came to a halt last year for the obvious and unstated reason. Right? And so sometimes we are making traction, we are building the policy and politics and power and all of the other P's towards progress, and we see very intentional retraction of that, right, happening in the policy world right now. One of the biggest and first changes, I'll name a few, was the ban of data around race. And nerds get why that's a big deal. I don't think other people, I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads. Every report I've ever written at every job I've ever had in this space has said one thing: we need disaggregated outcomes data. Oftentimes we know who's in a program. Far too many times we do not know who actually finishes the program, and we do not know what they are doing after they finish. So you can tell me I got 100 students and actually I'm doing a really good job. 35% of them are Black. So of those 35 students, how many of them finished your program? How many of them got jobs? What wages are they bringing in? Those are questions we actually have not required training providers to answer. They do it. If they do it, it's out of the goodness of their heart or because they got some grant funding that's tied to it, right? Come July, we are going to have a demand for much more data because Workforce Pell kicks into action. So typically Pell grants were only able to be used for traditional college degrees, associate's degrees, bachelor's degrees. Now we can use those for shorter term programs, whether that's a CNA nursing assistant, CDL truck driver, a 6-week IT coding institute. This is going to open up so many opportunities. And opportunity is actually a neutral word, right? This is going to open up so many opportunities, and we hope that, and we have to work towards ensuring that we have the type of guardrails and accountability measures and data to ask the right questions about what is happening to minoritized people and workers, to know if they are finishing, if they are getting good jobs, if these are even useful. So we can say, oh, this program is doing a good job. We should replicate, right? They've got some best practices that we know about, or this program isn't doing a good job and they should not be able to accept people's Pell funding because Pell is a finite resource. When you run through it, that's it, right? And we know entirely too much about federal funding, and especially about student loans, about the behaviors that bad actors, both in workforce training and in higher ed, can have to attract the students that we care about and work for into programs and into credentials that are not credentials of value, and that strap them with debt instead of a tool that they can use in the workforce and for their families.
I have a quick follow-up.
Sure.
In this current moment we're in where truth is not truth and facts are questionable, when you speak to collecting data, how do we identify sources of truth? Like, what do you, that might be too big for this conversation.
So my team and I, huge shout out to Dr. Gabrielle Smith-Finney, who is our lead analyst. Every month we do Jobs Day. So the Department of Labor, Bureau of Labor Statistics releases the unemployment numbers every first Friday of the month. And last month was the first time we issued a bit of a disclaimer because the Bureau of Labor Statistics itself issued a disclaimer about changes and about differences and adjustments month to month in those unemployment numbers. As you all may know, the Black woman who was heading up this work was fired, like many of the Black women who were employed in the federal government. And all of those things mean things for sure. And so it is unfortunate that we cannot look to what were assumed and trusted to be good and quality and truthful data in the same ways that we can. Thankfully, there's a group called Friends of BLS in this instance, but there are so many great groups and coalitions of people who are watchdogs. And I love the wonks. I love when they get nerdy because they can tell you down to a T what's real and what's not. I love the people who have had efforts over the last year to archive, right? That is such art, like our archiving history and data and information and downloading starting in November of 2024, if not before that, so that we actually have what we know to be true and real that may not be publicly available on the website, but I know somebody who knows somebody who has the older version, right? Or who has those files, those some of the great work that was done around the Good Jobs Initiative. All of those things disappear, right? And that's not uncommon with a regime change, with an administration change, but it's even more so now. And so I do think that we gotta go back to the old ways in some ways, right? Around like sharing person to person and organization to organization. But I love that folks are being very clear around archiving, around saving, around being confident in their expertise for sure.
Thank you. That's helpful. And it brings us into our last part of our conversation, which is really around building a movement and coalition building. So I do have some great hope around what we can accomplish. I know times are dismal, but I do believe that we have a coalition of the willing and people who are committed to this work. So, and that it's going to be important for us to build coalitions in order to get through the time that we're in, right? So, Felicia, can you tell us a little bit about your thoughts on the role of coalition building and creating a movement in general? Like, what have you seen? What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I think that no single organization can do the work. We are dealing with inequities that are entrenched in our institutions. And I think if we look at all of the major systemic reforms that we've seen throughout history, it's always been movements. Mm-hmm. And it's been movements with mission aligned and mindset and heart set aligned individuals, but also with unlikely allies, right? And so I think that it's important for us to understand that coalition building brings strength, right? In Spanish, we say, la unión hace la fuerza, strength and unity. Right now, we need that strength. And it's important for us to be able to find those common, overlapping issues, that shared agenda that we have, because when we look at what's happening in Minneapolis, for instance, a lot of the coalition and very much organically created, right? We need those co-conspirators. We need the allies of those communities that are being targeted. I think when we look at the civil rights movement, we see that the only way these system changes can happen is when we have the advocates, the inside-outside game, right? Those in the inside that have the values, that have the lived experience, that are trying to do their best to change the system from within. And you need those outside of the system those that are agitating when needed, those that are advocating, those that are putting pressure on the system to make a change, right? So we need to really buy into this inside-outside strategy because that's what we need right now. And we need to make sure that we have co-conspirators that will be part of that movement. One organization can have a great moment, but we need to build movements because we have a lot of work ahead of us. We are going to have to rebuild institutions. We're going to have to rebuild a culture of belonging and inclusivity. We're going to have to rebuild narratives, right, where things like equity is not sanctioned. So we really have a lot of work ahead of us, and that it could only be done if we leverage the strengths of multiple organizations that come from diverse perspectives and diverse experiences, and have people that look different but are at the same time coalescing around a common goal, and that is to keep and strengthen an America that is really living up to its values.
Thank you. I think these are really, really good points. Thank you. And Kayla, what do you think have been some of the barriers to the coalition, everything that Felicia is saying?
I want to call out something that was a thread throughout all of this, right? I make a point to name each one of those programs that I was in because I am very clear that that's how I got here, right? And almost all of those programs were catered to Black and Latino students, right? To students of color, to saying, we understand that we need dedicated, targeted pathways into these fields, and we're going to create them, right? We're going to do the professional development. We're going to coalesce around these students and give them the support that they need. And I hear so much of that in all of our responses and saying, like, student success is a direct correlation to student support, right? And I want to name that because I fear that we will lose that due to these attacks on DEI. We are losing some of the targeted programs. We are losing some of the pipeline programs that have developed the people that you see up here to be leaders in the field, and that is so intentional. That is so intentional, so intentional. I've also sat in on a couple K-12 sessions this past week here at South by, specifically around civic engagement. Because the decline and retraction and co-opting of civic engagement is also incredibly intentional, right? And a place that I see that happening, that I consistently bring up, and which you referred to, is around narrative change, is around social media, is around getting you where we know you are, which is on your phone every morning, right? In your community and in conversation, having influencers who you already know and see and talk to and believe and trust to replicate narratives about what college means or what degree matters or whether voting counts and if this is all a sim or if it's real or not. Like that narrative development, I want to be very clear, is policy in action. That is a well-funded, well-orchestrated policy approach, right, to fund the conversation and the narratives. And that's a huge thing that we are up against that we don't even acknowledge is out there. And that's probably the one I'm the most scared of. But I do want to shout out Tiffany Lofton. I saw her a couple weeks ago. We were both at Black Labor Week. She is with the U.S. Student Association. We crossed paths when I was at Ed Trust and she was at NAACP Youth in College. And she just had an observation recently on social media that she's been organizing students and seeing so much fear around retaliation, right? Like in fear about drawing attention to yourself under the current administration, and fear because administrations, like the administration on campus, is also telling students what they can and can't have an opinion about. And one of the things she said was like, the biggest problem is not with the people designing or policing us under fascism. It's the people who are too afraid to defeat it. And the quickest way to not have power is to believe you don't have it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that is a perfect lead-in, because you will be our last comment, Christina, to students. And what role do you think students have in this movement, and how can we help support them to activate their agency?
Students have always been at the forefront of these types of movements. And I'm really glad that you brought up Minneapolis and that you brought up like this civil discourse, because honestly, like you said, Nia, students are scared. They're genuinely worried about what's going to happen if they speak out. Specifically in Minneapolis, students from Red Lake Nation are going to these protests, and they're fighting for their rights. They're fighting for their community members. They're fighting for their neighbors, not literally, with their fists, but with their voices. And some will say that tribal members aren't being detained or aren't being harassed by ICE officers, and that's not true. It's not true. And I know that because I speak with my colleagues and I speak with my community members, and they let me know, like, this is what's happening, and we have to close campuses down because students are too scared to just come to school, which is crazy. Like, school is supposed to be a safe space, and it's not anymore for a variety of reasons. But like I said at the beginning, students have always been at the forefront of these social changes and these social movements. They have a really great intuition and a really precise understanding of what their own morals are and what their beliefs are. So I want to challenge all students to be really vocal about their feelings, about what they believe, about what they feel, especially at this moment. And I know it can be scary. Like, I'm just a girl from Santee Sioux Nation of Nebraska, but here I am in Austin, Texas, on this stage in front of all you guys, and I was real nervous before I got up here. But it's important to come up here and share your story and talk about your experience, because you're not alone in that experience, and there might be somebody who's a little bit more afraid or to come out, and they need you to be that advocate for them. And just know that the people at this table, the people in your academic spaces, whether that be K through 12 or higher ed, we're here for you, and we need to know what you need in order to help you.
Thank you very much. And so we're at the end of our conversation, but the goal for us was to share our experiences, to elevate some of the very critical issues that we have occurring in our country, and to challenge you all to figure out where you fit in this movement. We need to know what's happening. We need to identify where truth can be found. We need to listen to communities and to what they're telling us that they need. And we need to build coalitions in order to be able to advance the work that we're doing. Because for all of us and all of our organizations, we're saying that college completion should not be something that's a privilege for a few. So when we accept a student, then we are committed to them, and we owe it to them that they're able to complete their degree. So figure out what your role is, and I understand that it takes courageous leadership, but this is a time when we need to be courageous, and it also requires us to have a little bit of self-identification on risk tolerance, so things you can do. You can do different things at different stages of your life and your career, but the point is that whether you're inside or outside, there's something that everyone can do. And so we're calling you all to do that. And thank you very much for joining us today.